At exactly 6:23 a.m., U.S. Navy radar operators aboard the USS Ronald Reagan saw the first wave appear, dozens of fast-moving contacts rising from beyond the horizon. This was no drill. Intelligence had warned for weeks that China's Liaoning carrier strike group was rehearsing an aggressive maneuver in the South China Sea. Now, those rehearsals had turned real. For the next few minutes, every decision, every reaction, would decide whether an American carrier survived or went to the bottom. Calm voices in the Combat Information Center masked the tension in their eyes as the Aegis combat system began tracking, locking, and firing. Why did China's meticulously planned strike collapse in less than 20 minutes? And what does this mean for the next time these two superpowers meet in the Pacific? If these questions matter to you, stay with us, subscribe, and tell us what you think in the comments. For weeks, signals intelligence from Guam, Yokosuka, and Pearl Harbor painted the same picture. China's Naval Aviation Wing was pushing deeper into contested waters, rehearsing saturation strikes against carrier-sized targets. The Liaoning, escorted by two Type 055 destroyers, three Type 052D destroyers, and a wolf pack of submarines, had moved into position south of the Paracel Islands. Washington knew the flashpoint was coming. Satellite imagery showed Chinese deck crews loading anti-ship cruise missiles, while over-the-horizon radars swept the skies for American aircraft. But the U.S. Navy's response was not to retreat, it was to build what sailors call the Pacific Wall, a layered defense of Aegis destroyers, F/A-18 Super Hornets on alert, and SM-6 interceptors already programmed with threat data. One wrong decision could trigger open war. The clock was ticking, and both sides knew the first 20 minutes would decide everything. 6:23 a.m. The first alarm echoed through the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Ronald Reagan. SPY-1D radar feeds lit up with incoming threats. Multiple salvos of YJ-21 hypersonic anti-ship missiles, launched simultaneously from Chinese destroyers and land-based bombers operating from Hainan Island. Their speed, nearly Mach 10, meant the U.S. Navy had less than a minute to begin intercept sequences. The order was given without hesitation. The USS Shiloh, positioned 30 nautical miles ahead of the carrier, fired its first bank of SM-6 interceptors. Behind her, the USS Chancellorsville activated electronic warfare suites, flooding the airwaves with jamming signals designed to confuse the incoming missile seekers. Overhead, 4 F/A-18 Super Hornets from VFA 115 were already racing toward the inbound threat, each armed with AIM-120 AMRAAMs to thin out the missile carriers before they could launch a second wave. This was the heart of the Pacific Wall concept. Not one line of defense, but three, each buying seconds in a battle measured in milliseconds. 6:24 a.m. the first intercepts occurred. Blinding flashes lit the horizon as SM-6 warheads met the hypersonic missiles head-on, detonating them far from the carrier group. But for every kill confirmed, another missile broke through, forcing the Aegis combat system to cycle instantly to new priorities. The tension inside the CIC was electric sailors calling out impact predictions, computers calculating firing solutions, officers weighing whether to commit the final layer, the carrier's own RIM 116 rolling airframe missiles. China's plan was obvious now: overwhelm the U.S. Navy's missile defenses with sheer volume. At the same time, the Liaoning's J-15 fighter jets were moving in, aiming to finish what the missile barrage started. Yet the Pacific Wall was holding each defensive layer, shaving away the strike's momentum. 6:25 a.m. AWACS aircraft, orbiting 200 miles out, vectored additional Super Hornets into the fight, while an EA-18 Graham Growler jammed Chinese targeting radars from beyond visual range. The coordination was seamless, honed through years of joint exercises and real-world deployments. Still, no one in the CIC spoke of victory yet, because every sailor knew if even one YJ-21 got through, the cost would be measured in lives, not statistics. What no one expected was the next move. The Chinese commander would make a gamble that would either break the Pacific Wall or expose every weakness in their own strategy. 6:26 a.m. Just as the U.S. Navy's missile kill count began to climb, the Chinese task force executed an unexpected maneuver. The Liaoning's escorts opened a narrow gap in their formation, revealing two Type 93 Ampere nuclear-powered attack submarines lurking beneath. The gamble became clear. While the surface strike kept the U.S. focused upward, these submarines were sprinting toward firing range for their YJ-18 supersonic cruise missiles weapons designed to fly low and fast, slipping under radar coverage until seconds before impact. Inside the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, the Aegis operators faced a brutal calculation. Do they continue to pour resources into intercepting the still inbound YJ-21 second, or shift assets to hunt the submarines? The call came from the task group commander, a simultaneous fight on two fronts. The USS John S. McCain and USS Mustin, both Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, detached instantly from the missile screen and began aggressive anti-submarine warfare maneuvers. MH-60R Seahawks lifted off their decks, dipping sonar arrays into the churning sea, while P-8 Poseidon patrol aircraft scrambled from Andersen Air Force Base in Guam, guided by coordinates relayed from undersea hydrophone networks. 6:27 a.m. The second missile wave approached at a terrifying angle, some descending in erratic patterns as Chinese targeting systems attempted to dodge electronic jamming. One managed to breach the outer SM-6 envelope. At less than 10 nautical miles, the carrier group's innermost layer came alive. RIM 116 rolling airframe missiles street reeked skyward from the Reagan, shredding the inbound threat in a spray of shrapnel that fell harmlessly into the sea. Meanwhile, underwater, the battle turned violent but unseen. The USS John S. McCain sonar team picked up the distinct cavitation signature of a YJ-18 launch. Torpedo tubes flooded, and an Mk-54 lightweight torpedo was in the water within seconds. The result, one of the attacking submarines was forced to break off, releasing countermeasures as the torpedo closed in. By 6:29 a.m., the battle clock was ticking down toward the 20-minute mark. China's strike had not achieved a single confirmed hit. The Pacific Wall layers of air, surface, and subsurface defense was proving nearly impenetrable. But then, a new set of radar blips appeared. These were not missiles, they were dozens of small, fast-moving contacts rising from the Liaoning's deck. Drone swarms, capable of saturating sensors and spotting gaps for the next missile wave. It was a move the Pentagon had wargamed but never expected to see this early in a real engagement. 6:30 a.m. The drone swarm appeared on radar as a jagged wall of moving blips, dozens of compact, high-speed units skimming the waves, some no larger than a man's backpack, all moving with a single purpose: to blind the U.S. Navy's defenses. They weren't meant to destroy ships. Their mission was worse: feed the Liaoning carrier group real-time targeting data for a final missile strike. If that happened, the Pacific Wall would face a coordinated attack far more dangerous than the first two waves. In the Combat Information Center aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, the choice came fast. Standard counter-drone measures would not work against this many units. The only option was to reveal something the Navy had kept buried: a weapon not acknowledged in any press release or congressional hearing. The order came. On the deck of the USS Shiloh, a turret silently pivoted toward the swarm. Seconds later, a high-energy laser fired invisible to the human eye, but lethal to circuitry. One by one, drones lost control, spiraled into the ocean, and vanished beneath the waves. Simultaneously, an EA 18-gram Growler deployed a classified electronic warfare package, flooding the battlespace with false signals. Chinese sensors suddenly saw the carrier group scatter into multiple ghost fleets, each broadcasting as if it were the real target. 6:32 a.m., the third missile wave launched from beyond the horizon. Guided by the drone's last transmissions, they raced in, but the targets had already dissolved into deception. Missiles veered off, chasing phantoms, detonating harmlessly over empty water. In less than 20 minutes, the strike was over. Not a single American ship had been hit. The Pacific Wall had held. But there was a cost. The U.S. had just shown Beijing a weapon it was never meant to see. And now, the race to counter it had begun. In under 20 minutes, the U.S. Navy had not only stopped a full-scale Chinese carrier strike, it had done so without suffering a single loss. On paper, this was a tactical victory. In reality, It was a strategic earthquake. First, the Pacific Wall concept was validated in combat for the first time. Layered defenses from Aegis interceptors, to air superiority fighters, to classified directed energy weapons, had worked exactly as designed. This confirmed that a U.S. carrier group could survive a concentrated, multi-axis attack in one of the most contested regions on Earth. Second, the engagement exposed a dangerous truth for Beijing. Speed alone does not guarantee penetration. Hypersonic missiles, submarine-launched cruise missiles, and swarming drones had all failed when confronted with coordinated multi-domain defense. But the victory carried its own risks. By using its classified laser and Ghost Fleet electronic warfare package, the U.S. had shown capabilities it had hoped to keep hidden for a future, larger conflict. China's military scientists and cyber units would now dedicate resources to studying, simulating, and eventually countering those systems. Politically, the encounter sent shockwaves through Asia-Pacific capitals. U.S. allies in Tokyo, Manila, and Canberra saw proof that Washington could still dominate the maritime battlespace, a critical reassurance as China pushes its territorial claims. At the same time, Chinese state media framed the event as a trial rather than a defeat, vowing that, next time, the results will be different. The lesson was clear for both sides. The next clash would come faster, hit harder, and test every limit of endurance. The battle in the South China Sea that morning ended without American casualties. The Chinese carrier strike group withdrew under the cover of electronic haze, its missiles spent, its drones scattered across the waves. For the crews aboard the USS Ronald Reagan, the USS Shiloh, and every ship in the task force, the relief was immediate, but so was the understanding. This was not the end. It was the opening act. Billions of dollars in weapon systems had been unleashed in less than 20 minutes. Years of training and joint exercises had been tested under live fire. And perhaps most importantly, the U.S. Navy had sent a message without firing a single round in anger at a human target. The Pacific Wall works. Yet the cost of revealing such capabilities is measured in more than dollars. Every classified system used today will face a counter tomorrow. Every tactical advantage demonstrated becomes a puzzle for the adversary to solve. This is the paradox of modern deterrence. You must show enough to make an opponent hesitate, but never so much that they can study you in full. For America and its allies, the lesson is simple. Preparation cannot stop at today's success. The next engagement may not allow 20 minutes. It may not allow 2. The Pacific Wall held because crews were trained, systems were integrated, and every layer worked in harmony. That level of readiness is not an accident. It is the product of constant investment, discipline, and trust in the chain of command. To the viewer, the takeaway is more than military. It is about the nature of security itself. Power is not a guarantee of peace, but without it, peace becomes a gamble. Strength deters chaos. Readiness buys time. And in an era when seconds decide the fate of nations, time is the most precious commodity we have. The Pacific will see these two forces meet again. The question is not if, but when and whether we will be ready.